Hi everyone, my name is Didem. I'm a registered dietitian. Merhabalar, ismim Didem, diyetisyenim. Biraz sonra Türkçe özeti geliyor. Today, I want to offer a little bit of hope around diabetes. Having said that, we are living through some pretty distressing times right now in the world with COVID-19, systemic racism, climate change. Now, diabetes is related to all of those, and we'll talk a little bit more about that towards the end of this short video. Now, diabetes is a worldwide pandemic. It's spread like wildfire throughout the world over the last few decades. I bet you money, if you're watching this video, you know at least one person who has diabetes, or maybe you yourself suffer from this disease. But it's time to end the suffering. Type 2 diabetes is completely preventable and in most cases completely reversible through diet changes. All we have to do is cut out the sugar, right? Wrong. Unfortunately, the sugar myth is pretty pervasive out there. A lot of people think that diabetes is caused by sugar and carbohydrates, and so if we just avoid those foods, we'll be fine. In fact, I've met a lot of people who have diabetes and they think that a healthy plate is broccoli with some skinless chicken breast. No bread, no rice, no pasta, and heaven forbid, no fruit. I don't mean to patronize, not at all, actually, far from it. I admire anybody who's trying to take steps towards better health. The problem is misinformation. Diabetes is a complicated disease, and you can't pin it down to just sugar. The root cause actually is insulin resistance, and that in turn is highly related to fat in the diet. So let's go back a few steps. When we eat food, we digest it and it gets broken down into individual nutrients such as glucose. That glucose ends up in our bloodstream, but we want to get that glucose from the blood into the body's cells because that's where it gets used as fuel for all of our daily functions. Thankfully, we produce a hormone called insulin, which does just that. It takes the glucose from the blood and puts it into the cell. Insulin resistance happens when insulin just isn't doing its job that well anymore. And so the glucose starts to build up in the bloodstream. That's when we see high blood glucose readings. So what's going on here? Let me give you an analogy. Insulin is like a key, much like the one I'm holding here. And this is the lock for that key. So insulin is kind of like the key that opens the door, allowing glucose to come into the cell. Now imagine you go home today and you're trying to put your key in your keyhole, but you can't because somebody has put some chewing gum, someone's chewing gum and they just stick it all in your keyhole. Someone's kind of squished in chewed chewing gum into your lock hole or your keyhole. How well is this key going to work now? It's not. So that's what's going on in our bodies. Now, not with chewing gum, but with fat. So fat gums up what's called the insulin receptors on our body cells. And because of that, the insulin can't do its job. It just can't open up the cell to let the glucose come in. And so you end up with more and more glucose or sugar in the blood. I hope the solution is obvious here. In order to get this key to work, I need to degum this lock, take out all of that yucky gum from the lock. So in our body's terms, that means remove the fat from the lock so that insulin, the hormone, can work. And in fact, that's what research studies show. If you follow a low-fat, plant-based diet, you will reverse your insulin resistance, prevent type 2 diabetes, or if you already have diabetes, you can even reverse your diabetes. That's huge. You can free yourself of this disease. You don't have to be dependent on drugs for the rest of your life. You don't have to be dependent on insulin for the rest of your life. You can heal your body through the power of food. But what exactly? Like what kinds of foods are we talking about here? Let's take a typical day's example. For breakfast, instead of a scrambled egg burrito, let's say, you have a bean burrito filled with lots of veggies and no cheese. For lunch, instead of a cheeseburger, you have a hummus sandwich on a whole grain bun, again, filled with lots of veggies. And for dinner, we want to keep that broccoli, but we want to switch out the chicken with some more beans or tofu or another plant-based protein. And we want to include a whole grain. We don't want to eliminate an entire food group. We want to have things like whole grain pasta or whole grain rice, brown rice. All the while, we want to keep vegetable oils to a minimum as well, because again, the key is to follow a low-fat, plant-based diet. And I always remind people, do not forget about fruit. Eat fruit whenever, wherever you can. Now, I know what some people might say, especially if they have diabetes already or they have some insulin resistance. They're going to tell me, oh my, if I eat this peach, my blood sugar is just going to skyrocket. Well, that might be true, but if that does happen, it's not because of the sugar in the peach. It's because, again, we've gummed up those insulin receptors. So the key is not to avoid the beautiful, yummy, delicious peach. The key is actually to just clean out those locks. In other words, reduce the fat in our diet, and then we'll be able to metabolize all healthy foods, including fruits. A lot of people focus on blood sugar levels. But your blood sugar reading is just a symptom of your diabetes. And if you're only treating the symptom, then you're never treating the cause. You're never going to be rid of this disease. With all due respect, a lot of diabetes specialists still focus on getting, tight glucose control. But that doesn't mean that much if you're not treating the root cause. Obviously, if you're not eating something like this, you have diabetes, you're not eating fruit, then perhaps your blood sugar is going to be normal. But it's not because you're getting better. It's because you're just avoiding carbohydrate-containing foods, right? So the real success, the measure of success, to see whether you've been able to reverse your disease, is to be able to eat these kinds of foods, fruits and other carbohydrate-containing foods, and metabolize them without having high spikes of sugar. That's the measure of true success. And the time to do it is now. We know that people with underlying health conditions like type 2 diabetes, unfortunately, they're more susceptible to the effects of infectious diseases like COVID-19. And we know that diabetes affects people of color and other visible minorities much more than, it affects the general population. And we also know that the single greatest impact we can have as individuals on climate change is to eat more plant-based foods instead of animal-based foods. So all around, the more plant-based foods you eat, just the more positive that will come out of it. Thank you for listening. I appreciate it. And if you need support on achieving your health goals, then send me a message. I'd love to hear from you. And stay tuned for more nutrition tips. Merhabalar, şimdi Türkçe özeti. Bu videoda ne anlatmak istedim? Tip 2 şeker hastalığının esas kök sebebini anlatmak istedim. Genel kanının aksine tip 2 şeker hastalığının kök sebebi şeker değildir aslında. Şeker ve karbonhidrat içeren gıdalar değil. Esas sorun yağ ve en yağlı gıdalar hayvansal gıdalardır. Mesela her türlü et, süt ürünler, yumurta, balık ve tabii işlenmiş gıdalarda da çok yağ bulunuyor. Eğer bunları diyetimizden kesebilirsek o kadar çok iyi olur ki sağlığımız için. Tip 2 şeker hastalık riski çok düşüyor. Yani tamamen önleyebiliriz tip 2 şeker hastalığı. Ve eğer şimdiden varsa şeker hastalığı, onu tamamen yok edebilirsiniz. İnan ki yok edebilirsiniz. İlaçsız, insülinsiz, sağlığınıza kavuşabilirsiniz. Eğer daha fazla bilgi isterseniz lütfen ulaşın ve her zamanki gibi ilginiz için çok teşekkürler. İyi günler.